Hello? Oh, okay. I don't know if they can hear me.
Hi.
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 Hello.
Hello. We have a little bit until 1, but I just wanted to hop on in case you guys had any questions, because I haven't had a chance to meet you yet. I've just been working through, I'm the middle person, Really excited about today. I think we're going to have a pretty good turnout.
Oh, good.
Hi, Karen.
Hi. How are you?
We see each other all the time.
I know.
It was nice to see you again.
Yes, you too. It's always good to see you.
Hello.
Hi.
Okay, we're all so quiet. Are we just saving it all up?
Well, what is the whole plan of today then? Like, are we just going to run down the questions or?
So I'm Allison, by the way, from Manor College.
Allison, who are you?
I'm putting in my name now so that you can
Okay.
get to know each other a little better. So Christine asked me to moderate because she saw me moderate another panel once and thought I did good. So I won the job. So what I'll do, I'll just give a brief welcome and an intro. There are some people already joining us, so wow, just be careful. We have a couple people already. I'll give a brief intro and just welcome everyone, and then I'll go around and ask everyone to introduce themselves and talk about your title and what brought you here today. And then I figured I'd just run down the list of questions that Stasia was able to put together for us, if that works. And if you want to do it a different way, I'm happy to pivot.
Let's just go with your plan.
Sounds good to me. Yeah, and don't feel like every person has to answer every question. But if you have an answer to it, definitely do so. I'm not going to call on each one and say, well, Karen, you haven't answered this one, so it's your turn,
Thank you.
Sometimes too, that could get a little long, but
well, I know that Stacia, you when you sent the questions to Robin and I, you had like separate questions. So I wasn't sure how that was.
For you?
Yeah, there was like a separate thing at the bottom. There was
Right.
like 4 separate questions. I wasn't
Right.
sure.
Yes, and they're directly for you.
Okay. So should I just kind of maybe stay out of the other questions and just focus on the that are just for me?
No, I think that you can do what you feel comfortable with. Now, are
Okay.
you going to open up telling your story?
Did you want me to do that? Do you? She left.
here, I just saw a weird glare in my background. I wanted to shut off my light.
Is that what you wanted me to do? Because that's usually, I mean, I never spoke on this panel, of course, but usually I do open up with the story of how I got here, and I don't know how who's actually listening, because I don't want to get too in detail with the
Right.
actual crime, because I don't want to trigger anyone or what have you. But I think that it is kind of important to explain exactly what I've been through and how I got to this point, because I'm a survivor. I'm not from an organization.
Mhm.
So, anything that I say is going to come from my personal experiences.
Yeah. Do you want to start off with that?
Sure. Do you want me to you want me to just?
We will answer them towards the end, unless it seems appropriate to answer at that time. So don't worry, we'll get to your question. And just to note that we are recording today's event so that we can share this wonderful knowledge with others that can't make it today. So to start off, we're going to have everyone introduce themselves, and then we will kick off our program. So Karen, why don't we start with you?
Hi, my name is Karen Wittes. I'm a survivor. Did you want me to go into my story right now, or?
Let's do the intros first, and then we'll start the time.
Okay, so I'm a survivor, and I'm an advocate for crime victims' rights.
Good, Stacey.
I'm Stacia, and I actually am helping in the counseling office at Manor, and going to be working primarily with anybody who has concerns about domestic violence.
Thank you. Robin?
Hi, I'm Robin Jordan. I'm the Director of Primary Prevention and Awareness with the Women's Center of Montgomery County. And it's our 45-year birthday this year. And we've been practicing our mission of freedom from domestic violence and other forms of abuse for that long. So I'm glad to be here today. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Happy birthday.
Oh, well, thank you.
Olivia?
Hi, everyone. My name is Olivia Ohlenberg. I am a prevention education specialist at the Victim Services Center of Montgomery County. Victim Services Center is the rape crisis center for the county. So we provide many different services like free and confidential counseling, victim advocacy. We have a 24/7 hotline that is available for the community. And so we're here to provide that perspective on how sexual violence and intimate partner violence often overlap. So thanks for having me today.
Thank you. And Katie?
Hi everyone, my name is Katie Sanford. I'm a community educator for Laurel House, and we are a comprehensive domestic violence center for Montgomery County. So we work with clients at any point in their relationship, whether it's past or present. We offer a different variety of services, from a shelter, counseling, hotline, our DART program, our crisis counselors, as well as medical advocacy and education and primary prevention. I'm very excited to be here today. Thank you.
Thank you. So before we get started with our questions, Karen is going to share her story. So I just want to remind everyone again that we do have sensitive information. So if you do want to step out at any point, please feel free to do so. You can come back at any time. So Karen, it's your show.
Okay. Well, when I was 16 years old, I was stalked by my possessive ex-boyfriend until he followed through with his ultimate plans to try to take my life. On the morning of June 23rd, 1994, my stalker unexpectedly appeared at my house. He wrapped his hands around my neck, strangling me. I couldn't breathe at all. And then I lost consciousness. I managed to regain consciousness after this first strangulation. And he asked me if I believed in God so we could be in heaven together forever. And then he strangled me a second time. That time, while unconscious, he raped me. I regained consciousness halfway through the rape, and he began punching me with a closed fist until I blacked out yet again. I regained consciousness for a third time, just as my attacker began stabbing me in the chest multiple times with a 14-inch serrated butcher knife. He then kissed me on the lips and told me that he loved me. He wrapped me in bed sheets and shoved me underneath the bed, telling me to die. I knew that I couldn't stay there much longer, and I needed to get help. So when the timing was right, I squeezed myself out from underneath of the bed, and I staggered 8 houses up the street to my grandparents' house, where I collapsed in my grandfather's arms. My grandfather was a World War II veteran, and he did what he could to try to keep me alive until the police and paramedics arrived. I was rushed to the hospital by police escort because they realized that if there was the slightest delay in getting me there, that this would have resulted in a homicide. My blood pressure was 80 over nothing. I had a collapsed lung and stab wounds that were so close to my heart that I needed to be transferred to another hospital for emergency exploratory surgery. And almost 27 years later, I'm grateful to be here with you all today, sharing my story to help educate others and possibly prevent another tragedy from happening. So thank you for having me.
Thank you, Karen. That's amazing. And for being brave enough to share your story with us, it means a lot to us. I'm trying to keep it together here. So I really appreciate you.
Thank you.
So we'll get started with our questions. And we discussed this earlier with the panel, but anyone can jump in and don't feel that you have to all answer each question. If you don't have an answer, that's fine, because we have so many wonderful minds here sharing their knowledge. So what is intimate partner violence? And I might refer to that for the audience here as IPV moving forward. Jump in.
I can answer this one. Intimate partner violence is another term under the umbrella of domestic violence. A lot of terms we use interchangeably, especially when we educate, because some people might not connect with one of those words. So we can use dating violence, domestic violence, intimate partner violence. That just means that the person who is causing the harm is somebody intimately related to you. So whether that is a spouse, a partner, somebody who you are just having a sexual relationship with, it is someone who you are intimately related with and they are causing harm to you.
Thank you. Just helps get some definitions out of the way in the beginning, right? What are the early signs of an unhealthy relationship?
I can take this one. Extreme jealousy, controlling behavior, cruelty to animals and children, any explosive behaviors, if they try to isolate you from family and friends. These are some of the early warning signs, if they can, or if they're verbally abusive. So these are the things that we need to look out for.
That's interesting, Stasia, about the animals. I wouldn't have thought of that as an indicator, but it makes sense, you know, when you think about it.
It does absolutely make sense. There are people who actually make a living and they tour internationally to demonstrate the link between domestic violence and animal abuse because it's that prevalent. But I just want to kind of piggyback onto what Stacia was saying so well, and I used this last night during a presentation, but maybe if I can hold this up. So this is a power and control wheel, and anybody who's watching now can Google the words power and control wheel and find a variety of them. The original one was started in Duluth way back in 1980, I think it was 84, and it's very gender specific toward females. Because at the time and still presently, females tend to experience domestic violence more than other populations. But the Women's Center uses gender neutral terms and we just adopted that wheel. And everything I think, Stacia, that you were saying is definitely on the wheel, using intimidation, using emotional abuse, isolation, minimizing someone, denying and blaming, sadly using children, using privilege of any sorts, perceived power over someone else. Economic abuse is very huge, and it's also a reason why people stay in unhealthy relationships. There are many other reasons too, using coercion and threats. So this is a great tool, and I can tell you just from my experience working with survivors of domestic violence that people have chosen to leave relationships after kind of examining this type of information.
Thank you. And Katie put a resource there in our chat. So anyone who wants to see that wheel, they have the resource there.
Yeah, I put a copy of the wheel in there. It is a really awesome tool to use to examine your own relationships.
So why do people stay in unhealthy relationships?
I'll jump in one more. Again, sorry if I'm blabbing too much, just mute me if you need to. You know, I actually looked that up fairly recently because, you know, I think intuitively we all know, and from my line of work, we think we know everyone. And I found lists from 7 reasons all the way to like 50 some odd reasons why people stay. So it's actually everybody's own personal truth, you know, your own personal reasoning. And at the Women's Center, and I know at the other organizations as well, it is our job just to listen to why people stay and not kind of tell them what to do, because everybody's in their own place. So it could be anything, again, from they stay because of children, they stay because they can't survive on their own basic needs, their confidence is shaken. So there's so many reasons why, and it is really very individualized.
Just want to add on to that. I do a lot of work in like the media and things like that. And there was a Twitter campaign in around the year is escaping me now, but a woman named Beverly Gooden started the hashtag Why I Stayed. And I had gone through that hashtag and there were like 50,000 reasons as to why people have stayed in these relationships. And it's things that, you know, we wouldn't even imagine. One of the ones that Beverly had written was that she had created a safety plan and she, you know, did all the steps that we'll talk about, and she had a plan to leave, and her abuser slept in front of the door that whole night. So physically blocking her exit from having to leave. And I use this example with students all the time, and they're like, well, why didn't she like climb out a window? Why didn't she find another exit? But when you have that plan and you have, you know, set that plan for probably months, when someone, you know, throw something in there that derails your plan, you're kind of frazzled. You don't know what to do. You don't know where to go. So that her exit was blocked and she couldn't leave. She didn't know what else to do. So it's not as simple as, oh, just find another exit, because there's so much planning and so much time going into these things. We can't just assume that it's as simple as walking out a door or calling the police and getting out.
So, and to piggyback even on that, the most dangerous time for a victim of domestic violence is when they try to leave a bad relationship. So, what Katie said is absolutely true. Is sometimes it's just a matter of life and death, and it's safer to stay in that relationship than to leave. And that's why what Katie said too, planning is so important.
So what precautions can someone take to ensure their safety while dating?
I can also flag this one. Consider double dating. If you're meeting somebody and you want to go out with them, ask another couple to join you. Be aware of your decreased ability of your influence to alcohol and drugs. If he brings you a drink, make sure you know where that drink came from. There's nothing in it. Be firm, assert yourself, and also trust your instincts. If the situation is not going right, or you have a feeling in your gut, trust that intuition and leave, get up, call a friend. Say you have to go to the bathroom and call a friend to come pick you up. So those are some of the things that you can do. If you're leaving a party with somebody, make sure you tell another person that you're going to that part, that you're leaving and where you're going. So they know, somebody has an idea of where you are.
Katie, you'd mentioned, oh, sorry, Olivia, go ahead.
Oh, it's okay. I was just going to add as well, let's say you're meeting up with someone for the first time, just some more precautions. Meeting in a public place, if you're meeting someone for the first time, on a date, letting your friends or family know like ahead of time about the date, where you're going to be going, how long you plan on staying out, as well as, I know this is really often, even like some of my own friends use these, type of tips, but having some kind of code word with your friends, so that when you're on a date and you say, okay, if I text you this word, that means come pick me up because this isn't going well, or something like that. And even if you're on a date and you're maybe, let's say, switching locations on your date, let's say you are starting at a restaurant, maybe you go get drinks afterwards, just sending that text, letting someone know like, hey, I'm actually moving locations, and just keeping, someone up to date as you're out. Can also be really helpful when it comes to safety.
I know there's a feature, I don't know if it's Google or iPhone, like what system puts it out, but you can send your location. So that's, might be a good option too, to say, you're my friend, you're my backup friend, I'm going to send you my location just in case I'm not there at some point.
Allison, I think that's a really great idea, because sometimes we've found that we think that there's safety in numbers when we go out. And, we're with people, they know where we are, but they're all, sometimes they're having fun and they're kind of doing their own thing. And we've found in our client situations that they depended on being in large groups for security. But when you're out having a good time, you can't really 100% rely on that support, even though they're your friends and they're great and they're wonderful. The guards are all down. So I like the electronic component to kind of add just another layer.
So Katie, before you touched on a safety plan, can you, not you specifically, but anybody, talk about what is a safety plan and how do you make one? I like what you said about how it, when people get thrown off of that, it can really just shut down the whole process. But maybe talk a little bit about how it's created in the first place.
Yeah, so a safety plan is basically just what it sounds like, a plan to keep yourself safe in the relationship. And they can look different depending on whether you are planning on staying in the relationship or if you're planning on leaving the relationship. There are things that you might do differently in one case or the other. And they're pretty much the precautions that everybody else had said. So just keeping in mind, like, who knows code words that I can send? I'm not going to put myself in a room where there's no clear exit, or I'm not going to be alone where there are things that can harm me in the kitchen, if there are knives, if there's no way that I can get around from that. And our counselors and our advocates work with individuals to create their safety plans based on their relationships and what they want out of their relationships. But there are also tools online that create safety plans. The National Domestic Violence Hotline has one that I will also put in the chat. You go through and you just write down your information, what you can do if things go wrong, who you can call, and then you can print that out, or you can keep it on your phone, because we know that sometimes printed out things are not safe to have, especially if you live with an abuser or if an abuser is going to go through your stuff. So you can keep it either online or in an email, or print it out if that's what works best for you.
Oops, lost my questions here. So if, oh, sorry, go ahead.
Karen might have a really relatable experience of how a safety plan worked. And I don't know if that's something, so I know that you and your family went over what you should do in case of a situation, and it really paid off. If that's something that maybe you're comfortable in. And I know you've been telling, other groups, so I don't know if you feel comfortable in telling that today, but.
No, that's totally fine. I thought that was for the questions later. That's why. But no, having a safety plan in place was very important to me in the story that I just told about my survival, because my mother worked a full-time job and she was a single mother. And she told me, just if I were in any kind of danger whatsoever, if anything happened, go to your grandparents' house. Now, my grandparents lived only 8 houses up the street from me. And we lived in Philadelphia, which everything was row home. So when I say 8 houses up the street, it's not that far away. So it was a plan that was as simple as, if I'm in work and anything happens, go to your grandparents' house. And that is a plan that saved my life. And it was something so simple. And there was no way that my mother could have ever thought that something so horrific would have ever happened to me while she was in work. But yeah, a plan that simple. So it doesn't have to necessarily be the most intricate plan and, that has the most components. Just something so simple is what ultimately saved my life. And it was just something that was, instilled into me as a child. And I just remembered that. And in the height of what was actually intended to be my murder that was happening to me, that kept playing in my head over and over again. So it's very important to have, even however big or however small, a safety plan in place.
So if I see a friend or a loved one and I suspect IPV, what are common clues that I could look for that would help me identify them?
I would say some of the common clues would be if they have bruises that you can see, if they startle easily, if you constantly ask them to go out, but their partner won't let them go, or they'll say, I have to check with my partner, or, there's always an excuse why they can't go out. Those are some of the things that I would think of being those clues. You just kind of look for some, like the warning signs, would be just to check in with them. If they're dating with somebody, check in with them, see how the dates go, see how it's going while they're dating. Does anybody else want to jump in on that? Is there anything I missed?
I think we can also look back in that power and control wheel that Robin had talked about earlier. So if you see your friends with their partners, and just take note of how their partner acts around them and how your friend acts around their partner. Do they not seem like themselves? Are they skittish? Do they seem like they kind of walk on eggshells around their partner? So those can be clues that, there's something happening in the relationship, because if it's physical violence, yeah, sometimes we can see those effects. We can see bruises and bumps and scrapes, but we can't necessarily see the effects of verbal abuse or economic abuse or sexual abuse. So we just want to, make sure we're looking out for the relationships that our friends are having, and just taking note of how our friends' partners talk to them, or like you said, if they always have to check in and see if they can go out, and just really listening and kind of reading between the lines of what they say about their relationships.
That's right. And maybe lack of confidence, like a very kind of monotone tone of voice. Maybe, maybe not physical bruises, but sudden weight loss or weight gain, changes in those types of eating habits might be just some indicators as well.
So if I do notice some of these signs in a friend or loved one, but I'm nervous about approaching them because it is very sensitive, right? The subject, and it could be wrong, God forbid if you're wrong. How would I approach something like that?
I think you always want to approach with like care and concern. You don't want to immediately point fingers and say, your partner is awful, your partner is abusive, you need to leave. So to frame it as, I see you've been acting differently. Like, is everything okay? I just want you to know, even if you don't want to talk about it right now, I'm here for you to talk later if you ever want to. I'm not gonna, tell anybody these things, but to really come at it as a way of, I care about you and I'm concerned for your safety, instead of, I don't like your partner or your partner is treating you badly, because they might get defensive and it might not go anywhere. They might get angry at you and not want to open up when they eventually do decide to, if you come at them in a way of accusing their partner.
Katie, I'm just going to piggyback on that a little bit. If your friend or your family member gets angry at you, don't take it personally. They're scared. They don't know what to do. So they're not getting angry with you per se. They could be angry with the situation.
That's great advice.
Yeah, just, don't take it personally, and just consistently be there for them.
And if I can say, with my situation, I was a very young girl. I was a teenager. And believe me, the last thing I wanted to hear was my mother telling me that I was spending too much time with this person, or a school counselor even actually sat me aside and said that I was, too involved in this relationship. And as a teenager, that was the last thing I wanted to hear. But I knew in my heart that they were right. So for me, just hearing, another person say this, it confirmed it for me. So like I said, I didn't want to hear it. I wanted to kind of just distance myself from that, but I knew they were right. And it put it into my mind that, something needed to change, and it helped a lot. I kept recalling what they were saying.
So I think it takes an average of about typically 7 times for someone to leave in a relationship that they're very ingrained in. So you can imagine the frustration with family and friends as they're trying to help a person, because it is personal. It's someone you care about. So it's hard to separate that personal thing. And then, frustration ends up, and then the support systems end up, no longer there. Another tactic might be just to simply try to take the person, if it's not working, to do it on a personal level, just to kind of supply information that's available and let them reflect on their own time. Sometimes when someone's ready to pick up that pamphlet or pick up that power and control wheel, then they're ready to read it and they're ready maybe to make an action. So just supplying good resources for them.
Yeah. So if I am prepared to leave, what are some things I can do to prepare myself to leave that relationship? And maybe talk about, is there paperwork I should take with me? Is there anything from the home that's essential that needs to be, in my possession when I leave?
I would say gather any important papers, birth certificates, social security cards, anything that you need to start a life with not being in that house. Make sure you have a bag packed. I mean, you can maybe stuff it in the back of your closet or something like that. And one thing that I firmly believe in is have your own credit card, because this way nobody can get onto that account if you have your own credit card, and you can do what you want. So that to me is a very important thing to do. Just make sure you have all your important paperwork, any phone numbers that you need, any other documents that you think are very important to take with you.
Karen, we do have a question for you, and I know we're going to get to it because that's one of the reasons why you're here. But we'll get to it very shortly. who do I call? Is there anyone I can call if I think I'm in an abusive relationship? And what do the organizations like the ones that you're part of do to support the victims of IPV?
So there are a whole bunch of different hotlines and numbers that you can call if you think you're in an abusive relationship, or even if you're concerned for a friend or a family member. If you are specifically in Montgomery County, there is Laurel House. We have a 24/7 hotline, which is an access to any of our services. And we're about to roll out a text line too that you can text and talk with our advocates to access any of our services. But they also have, national hotlines, or if you are living in a different county, I don't know if your school is currently virtual, so you might be coming from a different county or a different state even. Every single county in Pennsylvania is going to have a domestic violence center that you can call. But since you are also going to school in Montgomery County, you could call one of the Montgomery County domestic violence agencies. And I can put, Laurel House's hotline in there if, Robin, you want to talk about your services.
So Montgomery County, as big as it is, we're grateful to have all the support. So the Women's Center is also a domestic violence agency that provides counseling services. So full support to anyone experiencing relationship difficulties. We also have for our younger people, our teens, private teen chat, which is done via text. So the number there is 833-641-0110. And it's just for another way for teens to get support without maybe having to go to somebody that they feel uncomfortable with. They're not really in great relationship with their parents sometimes as teens, or they don't want to go to their teachers, but they have this private support line via the Women's Center. We also have a new website for teens. It's safedatingforteens.org, and that's only for teens. We don't have parent information or teacher resources on it. It's just basically for younger people who are dating. And then, of course, the Women's Center 24/7 hotline is 1-800-8 what is it now? I have to remember whatever. 1-800-773-2424. We have so many websites and hotlines. So it's 1-800-773-2424, and we can put our information in chat as well. But we just like to make sure that we reach out to everyone of all populations. We have a lot of great LGBTQIA+ relationships within the community. So if anyone from that population needs support, we're here to help them as well.
And I can also say that victim services can also provide services. We help if there is a sexual violence component to the domestic violence. If not, we do, since there are 2 domestic violence centers in the county, we do typically refer people who call our hotlines to those 2 agencies, unless there is a sexual component involved. And we also see children for counseling who have witnessed domestic violence in the home. So that's another service that Victim Services provides. And I know I mentioned a little bit earlier, Victim Services has a 24/7 hotline as well as free counseling and victim advocacy as well, if there's a sexual component to the domestic violence.
Wonderful to have all these resources right in our own county. It's just amazing. And I know we've worked with all 3 of the organizations for a long time and have referred students. And I know students that have used your services and they've all just praised you. So thank you for all the work that you do. Excuse me.
Can I piggyback on that a little bit?
Yeah.
No, I'm not sure if we have people from New Jersey on our call today. So I'm going to actually put that one hotline number for New Jersey in that section as well.
So we've heard of something called a PFA. Can you talk about what that is?
Okay, I guess I'll do it since I'm on. So PFA is called, the initials stand for Protection from Abuse Order. And it's used to protect someone who's in pretty clear and present danger from an abuser. And what it does is it allows distance between an abuser and the victim. We don't like to use the word victims, but sometimes that's the only word that really comes to mind. So a PFA is granted through a court via a judge. And if it holds, then, you know, it could be from a year to 3 years that said person has to stay away from you and a certain distance. Their family can't contact you, their friends can't contact you on their behalf. So I just want to point out something about, well, a few things about PFA. We really do recognize that the Women's Center, I know Laurel House and everybody on this call would recognize that there are many types of abuse. So emotional abuse, sexual abuse, which would probably qualify for a PFA. But it really has, the use is if there's a physical issue attached to it, and that if you're not separated from that abuser, then something is really, you know, there's a really high potential for something to happen. So we know that people have unpleasant situations with abuse a lot of times, but it doesn't qualify for a PFA, and the court sets the standards. And we wish that we could separate everybody from any kind of abuse, but it really has to be clear and present danger. And if something doesn't take place, then, you know, your life would be jeopardized. So the Women's Center, and I think, you know, others on this call will support those who need a PFA. It's a very tedious process, beginning with the paperwork that has to be filed, writing a victim impact statement. So we help with those things. We do not ever tell people what to do or what to write on these things. We're just there to support and to guide. The other thing that the Women's Center does, and I don't want to speak for everybody, but I believe it's the same, will accompany people who were victimized through the court process. Again, it's very intimidating and very tedious. So we want to make sure everybody knows the process. And actually in the Montgomery County Courthouse, the Women's Center has an office, and we help with writing PFAs and filing them. So we're there to support anyone going into the Montgomery County Courthouse where these things are filed. We also accompany victims to hearings and court proceedings. In one of the viewing rooms in the courthouse, the Women's Center has a video that was made by, I think it was the Philadelphia Art Institute, to walk everybody through the process. So we feel education is very useful to those who have to go through the PFA process, and we support from the beginning to the end. And even during the term of the PFA, our organizations will just make sure that everybody knows the status of what's going on. We do checkups with clients all the time. That's maybe more information that you wanted to know, but
Great.
it's all important.
I also want to jump in really quick before we move on to the next question. I want to make just make the point that a lot of times students come up to us and assume that it's a restraining order. And just want to note that Pennsylvania does not do restraining orders. We only have protection from abuse orders. And so that doesn't mean that if your abuser walks into a Walmart that you're in, they have to leave that Walmart. It just protects the survivor from any abuse, harassment, stalking, things like that. They're not allowed to contact you. Family members cannot contact you on like their behalf, things like that. And if they do violate the PFA, that can result in, you know, them getting in trouble, them getting fined, them facing jail time. But the most common question is like, oh, does that mean if, you know, I'm at a party and they show up, like they have to leave, I can call the cops? And that's one of the hardest things, is that, you know, in some people's cases, it is just a piece of paper, and, you know, the abuser is not going to stop because they have this PFA. So it's also important to, you know, have those safety plans and have people who can, you know, get you out of that situation, get them out of that situation. But it really just depends on each individual relationship, because everyone is different. Sometimes a PFA is going to be, you know, effective, but sometimes they'll have that PFA and their abuser still does not leave them alone.
And I
That's good
think,
information.
and I am-
Jump in a sec. So I just want to say, just to piggyback, because this is important what Katie said. So PFAs are granted only for intimate relationships and biological relationships. So spousal relationships, and, household biological. So if you're having a situation maybe with a neighbor or your roommate, that's not an intimate partner, people really want to get a PFA sometimes for those circumstances, but that's not allowable in our courts in Montgomery County.
So there are SVPOs, which do cover, which is different than a PFA. So all the letters get confusing, but an SVPO is a sexual violence protection order. So it's different than a PFA, but it's a similar process, and that covers acquaintances, friends, coworkers, neighbors, I believe too. So there are a couple different ones. There's also something called a PFI, protection from intimidation, which is for cases of harassment and stalking when the victim is a minor and the defendant is an adult and they don't have any type of relationship. So there's a couple different ones available. But yeah, the PFA, exactly what you said, Robin. But yeah, it kind of gets confusing. I know I've gotten those.
There are alternatives.
A lot of people being like, "Did I get a PFA or an SVPO?" And it definitely depends on the relationship.
Yes, and there's something called defiant trespass, which is a letter that can be received. It's almost like having a fence up on your property or a keep out sign. It doesn't really hold a lot of weight, but it's kind of more of, I'm telling you to stay away from me. Mm-hmm. It's not even filed with a copy, and so at least you're on people's radars. Like, you know what? I know you're here. I don't want you here. Here's a letter to tell you not to stay here. It doesn't, again, hold as much weight, but it's another alternative that sometimes is effective. So I think, talking out different options sometimes to see what's right for, the situation at hand.
And I think it's also important that when you are granted a PFA, that you make copies of that, keep a copy with you at all times, give it to your employer, give it to your family members. Make sure where you're going has a copy of this in case the person decides to come to your workplace or, goes to your mother's house or something like that, that you have that PFA.
Yes. And they might happen in different places. It might happen where the event took place of abuse, or it might be where you reside at present time. So it's really, there are a lot of decisions. So it's a complicated process. And I think that's why we're all kind of here working for these organizations to help guide people through the process. Mm-hmm. But yeah, it could be a little bit convoluted and intimidating, but we're here for support.
That's why you're there to help.
That's why we're here to help.
Yeah, I was going to say the same thing, Robin. That's why we have hotline numbers, So if it can be really tailored to individual, experiences. So just like what you said, it can get convoluted. So if anyone is, has questions, that's why our hotline numbers are there, to help clarify any question that you may have.
That's right.
So just for our panelists, I'm just going to skip the next couple because I want to make sure that we get to Karen. So, and I do want to touch on this last section of questions. And if we have time, we can go back and answer more questions about the PFA. So what would happen if I call the police? I'm having an abusive relationship and I call the police. Will they believe me? Am I going to have to go to court? Kind of maybe talk about that process, and maybe Karen, you can help with that process too.
So I think it depends on the situation, what would happen. I know the Women's Center, I'm guessing others is, who are here as well. We help support the police with education so that they know what it's like to walk in the shoes of someone, experiencing abuse. So we try to kind of, educate them so that they have policies and procedures that are in line with what's needed at a certain time. And it really just depends upon what they, how the investigation goes. Sometimes, we'll get police reports in, some offices send police reports to the women's centers so we can follow up their call permission slips. And some are just a matter of maybe two people having an argument and it got heated and it just got loud, but they're okay. They just needed some cooling down time. Then sometimes police go out and they'll do what's called a lethality assessment report or LAP screening. And that really is a good determinant to see if somebody's life is on the line, or if there is clear and present danger. And if that person stays in that situation, what will happen to them long term. So if the lab report comes back that there is like a high degree of possibility that this person's life could be impacted in a dangerous way, they'll call someone. I'll just use the Women's Center, for example, and they'll get to us so we can plan for housing, safety planning, just alternative situations. We have to listen to what their needs are, because people, it might be a housing situation that they have an issue with. It might be that they need more security. It might be that they don't have financial access to finances to leave a situation. So we start at square one once we get that lab information. Usually the officer will call us and tell us what the situation is and put us online with the person who was abused. And actually sometimes we've had officers talk to the male and the female, and I think Laurel House and the Women's Center got simultaneous calls because they feared that both of the people involved in the situation were at danger, so they called us both at once. So yeah, I think it just depends on the screening that takes place when they're out there. And I hope, and I think that we kind of try to help them believe the victim, because we believe the victim, and to listen to what the victim has to say.
I also just want to plug really quickly our crisis counselors. So Laurel House has a domestic abuse response team advocates, a group of advocates who will go out, if the police are called. The police will call them. They're on call 24/7. There will always be somebody to show up and do that crisis counseling so they can help with the safety plan. And we'll work with them throughout, their time at Laurel House to help them get to a place where they feel safe and happy and comfortable, even if that's staying with their partner. I don't know exactly how they're doing it with COVID currently. I believe they're just doing telehealth things, but they're still always available. If police are called, because we have that, like Robin said, are the police going to believe me? We try and educate them, but they come up from a different background than people who work in domestic violence come from. So you might feel safer or more comfortable talking with somebody who has that background in domestic violence. And so we're always here.
That's a good point. And we know too, part of what happens is, the paperwork for victims compensation, perhaps, or, there's a lot of planning that the police just aren't qualified to do, and nor should they do. And that's why, we're good first response after the police, putting them into domestic violence organizations' hands is really necessary to get to the bottom of what's needed.
Thank you. Great information. So Karen, I think we're going to jump over and pick your brain a little bit. Were there any signs that you can share that made you think or know that you were headed for trouble? I know you touched on it a little bit earlier, but.
Well, Stacia also touched on it pretty good too. For me, it was definitely the possessiveness in the relationship. It was like he wanted me all to himself, and then that grew into isolation. He wanted to completely isolate me from all of my friends, my family members, and that's ultimately what resulted in our breakup. And then from there, the stalking began. And back then it was mainly in the form of hang-up calls, just to kind of keep tabs on me to see where I was, and showing up to places that he wasn't supposed to be at and things like that. So, but nowadays it's so much easier for people to keep tabs on their exes because of phone apps and social media and things like that. So I would say, while in the relationship, definitely be cautious of possessiveness and isolation. After the breakup, be definitely on the lookout. Red flags, warning signs would definitely be stalking, showing up to places and things like that.
Okay, that's great. That actually answered my second question of what are some advice you can share. So that was pretty good advice. We did have a question in the chat, and I think it leads to our other question for you. So Ashley asked, were there any laws in place that protected you after being attacked? And are there currently any laws or policies that assist victims?
Well, there's a lot of different laws now, but I'm Karen from Karen's Law. So I could tell you a little bit about that and how we came to that. My efforts with Karen's Law came through the re-victimization that survivors face during the court processes and the parole processes. A lot of times we often think that after conviction and sentencing, the victims can go home, or survivors, whatever you want to say, I'm fine with both terms. We go home and then we can just live our lives and everything's great. But unfortunately, that's not the case. In my case, my attacker continued contacting me from prison and things like that. And the parole process for survivors is just grueling, and it's intense, and it's horrible, and it brings everything back over and over again for us. And we have to keep reliving it. And it's like a systematic cycle of abuse for crime victims. So I figured, I wasn't the only one going through this. Thousands of survivors across our Commonwealth are going through the same re-victimization during the parole process. So I made my voice heard to our state legislators, and thankfully they heard me. And in 2018, a bill was introduced inspired by my story called Karen's Law. And with a lot of hard work and dedication, 3 years later, and it felt like an eternity, but 3 years later, the Governor Tom Wolf, signed Karen's Law into final law on November 25th, 2020. It was actually the day before Thanksgiving, and it was effective immediately. And I realized, that it is truly a miracle that I survived what was intended to be my murder. And this is just my way of paying it forward. I want to use my experiences, to help any survivor I can. And that's what Karen's Law is about. So I would definitely encourage any of the students listening, to make your voices heard. If you feel as though something is unjust in our system, or, something just isn't right, or there's a loophole in our system and something needs to be done. I'm just a dance teacher. You know what I mean? I'm a dance teacher who is unfortunately a survivor of a violent crime and rape. But I made my voice heard, and I know nothing about passing, well, I do now, but at the time I didn't know anything about passing legislation. But I made my voice heard to our legislators, and we are the ones who put these people in control. They are there to represent us. So make your voices heard. The worst that could happen is they say no, but who knows? I'm living proof that change could be made in our laws. And so I would just say, I encourage you to make your voices heard to our state legislators.
Thank you. And thank you for being the warrior and the champion to get that law in place. I mean, it's exciting that it just happened too last year.
Yeah.
So congratulations to you, and then for doing the hard work for us and for people, for victims everywhere, survivors.
It's my pleasure. It's definitely my pleasure. Thank you.
One thing I do want to talk about a little bit is, a lot of times we look at IPV as being man against woman, but we have to remember that it could be the woman being against the man. There's also same sex IPV. I mean, these are things that we do have to keep in our memory, that it's not always a man attacking the woman. It could be the complete opposite. It could be same sex. So these are just things I think that are important to note in the back of our minds. And men aren't as quick to make that telephone call.
It's a good point, Stacia. I asked people here if they have any questions. They can put them in the chat in the Q&A. But just before we wrap up, if you want to each just go around and give one last bit of advice or piece of wisdom that we can share with the group, I'd appreciate it.
I would just say trust your gut instinct, because a lot of times with manipulation, the manipulator will make you second guess yourself. And when if you don't trust your gut instinct, that's the first step. We have all of these amazing resources, people who are here with us today, Laurel House, Women's Center of Montgomery County, all of these amazing resources. But in order to take to contact them, you have to trust your gut instinct first. I was second guessing myself all over the place. And when I would confront my abuser about it, he would kind of twist it around and make it like it was my fault and make me actually feel guilty for questioning his behavior. So trust your gut instinct first, and then definitely reach out to our amazing resources.
And we're here to help you. We're here to be your support, your advocate. Ride the bus with us. When you feel comfortable, give us a call and get on that bus, and we will walk you through everything that you need to do.
I would also share that, you know, it's so important that we support survivors of IPV. It's also important to support prevention efforts too, and support, you know, we have to reduce the prevalence of these crimes as well. And so I know that I've worked with Katie many times before. We provide programs for high school students so that they know what a healthy consensual relationship looks like in the first place, to hopefully reduce, you know, the prevalence of these crimes as well. So I think that's another thing I'd like to plug, you know, as a prevention educator. I think it's important to, you know, support prevention efforts in the community as well, and make sure that, you know, advocate for those types of programs at your school and things like that. So that's my last piece.
I also think it's super important, two things. We talk a lot about, you know, how to help our friends that seem like they are, you know, in unhealthy relationships, but it's also super important to, you know, call out your friends whose behavior is not healthy. If you see them do something or say something, call them out, tell them that that's not okay. Because oftentimes we take advice from our friends. And if we're called out for, you know, our bad behaviors, we can really do that looking inside of us and realizing, you know, maybe I should get some help. And also as a survivor, I want you to know that, you know, you're not alone. There are people who are here to help you and that we believe you, and you don't have to, you know, carry this on your own.
You know, I don't know what else I can say that wasn't said so well just now, except there's no excuse for abuse. And again, we are all here for you.
So I have a question statement in the chat from a student. He stated that women that are in abusive relationships and they know it decide to stay with that person for fear or to believe that the person might change their behavior. I'm not sure if he's asking if they stay for fear or thought of change, but maybe just touch on those points a little bit.
That's actually pretty high on the list. Thinking you can fix somebody is high on the list of why people stay in a healthy relationship. So if it's, you know, that is a really valid statement that Carlos made. So yeah, both of what he said are both on, if you were going to have a top 10 list, they would both be on that.
I think that answered his question. He gave a follow-up to me in the chat, in the Q&A. Thank you. Well, thank you all for giving me your time today, giving all of us your time today. It was so informative even to me, and I feel like you know, I've been doing this work for a long time, and you know, sometimes you think you know it all, but I'm so glad that we take the time to learn the new things that like new laws like Karen's that came out just last year, and just new services that the groups represented here today, and then Stasia helping out the college with her counseling. It's just you can't put a price tag on any of this, and we use our students use your services so much, and we wouldn't be able to do what we do for our students without your help. So we really appreciate it. So thank you all for being here today. And for those that are attending, we did record this session today, so we'll be sharing that later on, probably through our counseling office email. So keep an eye on that. We also, as I had stated earlier, and a few times throughout this, we have posted our counseling services information in the chat. So please reach out to Christy Prince, our Director of Counseling, if you need to talk to her about anything. And then we also, as Stasia mentioned, she would be willing and open to counseling students in domestic violence situations. So thank you all for your time today. Really appreciate it. I hope everyone enjoys the nice weather we have coming. Have a good day.
Thank you.